while I was like in that department, I did get to dabble a little bit in storyboards, in animatics, and that's what had reinvigorated that interest back into comics for myself.
Hmm.
Because for a long time, comics had been like this big, daunting thing of like, I want to do these, but I don't know where to start.
Welcome back to Inspired Inc., the CWS podcast, a show where we promote indie comic creators and become inspired by what they create and their journey of creating it. I'm your host, Brandon Bloxdorf, and today on the show, we have creator Al Acevedo joining us, and we talk about how finding communities can better any aspect of life, the influence that toy designing and animation has on comics, and how you can make things happen on your own if you truly want it enough. All this and so much more on today's Inspired Inc. Where did that kind of like come from? Like, how did you feel like, you wanted to do everything solo versus like finding people to like kind of collaborate with?
Honestly, I think part of it was just not actually being within like indie comic circles from the
Oh, cool.
get-go.
Yeah.
Um, I was someone who kind of always dabbled in like small comic strips or little comics here and there through high school. I put it down for about, 5, 6, 7 years, as I kind of became an adult, got into working. Um, and then in 2019, um, as I was working on my current comic right now, Husk, I was not on Twitter, so I didn't know about the indie comic circles there. I was mainly active on Instagram, and there really isn't, at least at the time, there really wasn't like an indie comics community that I was aware of at the time. So I had no exposure to, hey, you can put together teams. It in my experience. I really only understood it as like you've got the professionals who are hired by the big two or some of the, like indie publishing, uh, um, not companies, publishers,
Yeah.
or you just kind of go it alone. And like the one of my biggest influences, I realize I'm kind of going a little
No,
sideways.
please.
It'll make
Yeah, no,
sense
I
in a
love it. No,
second.
yeah, so much. Yeah, I love it.
One of my biggest influences was Joan and Vasquez. So like
Okay.
I grew up watching, Invader Zim, but also reading Johnny the Homicidal Maniac.
Yeah.
I did read Squee. I did not read I Feel Sick. I still haven't gotten a copy of that. But in my head, I'm like, okay, one person, cool.
Hmm.
Um, so if he can do it, I can do it. So yeah, that's pretty much where it started. I just thought, well, if I can write the story, if I can draw the story, I'll learn to letter. So I went
Hmm.
looking for all of the tutorials I could, all up and down YouTube. I also went and when I did finally join Twitter, I had found out about um, the name's escaping me right now. Shoot, I don't. It's not Kablam Studios. It's like
I feel like that's something that sounds familiar. I'm so bad with like remembering like Instagram and then Twitter handles at the same time. But yeah, like
yeah.
finding those resources that really just kind of call to you to like, give you some information on that. Cause I
Hmm.
feel like lettering, especially like when you're teaching yourself, it's one of the most difficult parts because
Hmm.
like lettering can really just like make or break your comic. And you're really finding
Yeah.
like a flavor. And especially for Husk, like you really wanted to find like something that was like more of that Todd Klein, like I'm not just gonna do a basic word bubble for everything. Like you wanted it to have like a design aspect to it and some flavor
Hmm.
to it. So you
Hmm.
can't I could only imagine like the tutorials and time that it took to make those word bubbles like the way you do.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I kind of shot myself in the foot with that. It wasn't until after I created those balloons to make them appear hand drawn
Yeah.
that I learned, like, oh, I could have gone very simple, and I could have gone with like a balloon that would be much more easily editable
Hmm.
as I like change the size, change the shape. The way that I have it, there's the outline that you see is actually a faux effect. So it's a shape in black behind a shape in white. The issue with that is like I work in Adobe Illustrator,
Hmm.
because they're shapes and not a stroke. Um,
Oh.
as I resize, I have to adjust the relative size between those two shapes to make everything consistent. So it's a little extra time on the back end that I probably could have saved myself with a little extra preparation. But I'm in this for the long haul. So I'm like, all right, if I can figure out how to apply that hand drawn look to a stroke later, great.
Win.
If not, in the meantime, I'm just plugging along with what I got.
How long does it take you to kind of work through? I mean, I noticed you publish everything on your website like page by page. You're kind of doing it like blog posts, pretty much. Like, is that the way you kind of structure your story, and you just want to release it just to kind of get it out there to audiences? And like, how long does it take you to work on each page at that point too?
It's kind of a it's been a wild journey getting there. I know that from the get go, I had always wanted to format the comic for print, page by
Hmm.
page, old school, like Smack Jeeves style. Um, and so I I kind of went about developing it sort of in like a roundabout way. Um, I knew I wanted to jump in and like, okay, here's my script, here's how issue one's going to go, here's how the rest of the story is going to go. It's I'm figuring out how to lay out all of my pages, and then I knew that like I want to finish each issue before I roll them out page by page, so that takes the stress off of my plate as far
Mm,
as okay, I got to get a page done every week. Um, I started working on Husk in it was early 2021, like actually putting pen to paper,
cool.
um, 2021. And um, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought real quick. Um, the the way that I went about it, like there was already so much going on, like
Oh yeah.
in
Just.
2021 that I
Hmm.
was like, I really don't need to impose a weekly schedule on myself, especially as someone who is still very green to
Yeah.
comics. I had done one challenge on Twitter, which was um, February, if you're
Oh,
familiar.
cool. I've heard of that
February,
one.
yes, it's a challenge with storyboard artists in mind, where
Hmm.
you give yourself the whole month of February. You create a storyboard that eventually becomes an animatic, and by the end of the month, you have a completed project. Or you could take a different route, where each week you do a smaller story, smaller boards, and then by the end of the month, you have 4 animatics that
Oh
are much
wow.
shorter. I saw that and I thought this is a great opportunity to challenge myself to like really get my feet wet and see if comics really are something that I want to do.
Yeah.
So I took that. I did a 6-page black and white prequel comic. It's called Suss Out. It's free to read on my Ko-fi.
Cool.
Um, got that done in the month, and that's pretty much what had decided for me like, okay, cool, I want to jump into this. Um, but so like after that, like figuring out how to actually go issue by issue, um, was definitely a learning curve. Was definitely
Yeah.
like, okay, how do I organize? So issue one was much more of a rocky start, getting that done. And then issue two, I actually just wrapped up. I got my prints
Oh, cool.
last week. They
Yeah.
look beautiful. Um, and every issue as it goes by, I'm making adjustments here and there. I'm figuring out, I'm learning from more resources, learning from other people, like what is your process, what works for you, and figuring out like, okay, um, you know what can I do to better expedite my
Hmm.
process, and I can still put out a good product without losing my sanity.
Yeah, I mean, and I feel like that's such a cool approach you kind of took from it from the beginning as well. Like using that storyboard formatting and giving yourself a challenge that's not even like a comic book really related challenge, but you went about it in a way that you felt comfortable. And I think that's a really good goal to have, especially as a beginner creator or for any creator, is that sometimes when you put too much pressure on yourself to be like, I need to get a page done weekly, I need to write daily, I need to do X, Y, and Z that I hear from like these pros and everyone like
Mhm,
encourage us to do, like, especially during those times that you're talking about, that
mhm,
2021,
mhm.
COVID-ish area, like everything felt so like, just tense, and everything felt like,
Yeah.
whatever I put too much into, like a crumble, and just stressful. It was hard for a lot of people to really free themselves. A lot of comics came out from that time, which is great, but I feel like, those barriers and like getting started sometimes just kind of hurt, and it was kind of hard. So I could totally see where you're coming from on that. But like using it as a storyboard, so I mean, do you kind of still carry about that same precision when you're going about these, other issues? Are you storyboarding them and like working well on your thumbnails? Like, did that help instill your practice to make your comics?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I professionally, I actually work in the toy industry, the consumer products,
Oh,
and
rad.
through that, I actually got to dabble a little bit in like a grassroots content or IP development department at my last company. So while I was like in that department, I did get to dabble a little bit in storyboards, in animatics, and that's what had reinvigorated that interest back into comics for myself.
Hmm.
Because for a long time, comics had been like this big, daunting thing of like, I want to do these, but I don't know where to start.
Hmm.
Um, and I honestly, I find it's funny you mentioned because this weekend I've actually been working on thumbnails for issue 3.
Oh,
Um,
rad.
I find them the most enjoyable and also the most infuriating part.
Okay.
Uh,
How so?
because, well, it's because I shouldn't say maybe infuriating is too strong of a word, but they are they're very taxing. They're very involved the way that I
Hmm.
go about thumbnails. I have seen how when other people share their process, a lot of their thumbnails are super loose. They're like, yeah, just get it done. Just I want beats and like figure out the layout. We'll figure out the details later.
Hmm.
Um, the way that I work, I tend to kind of push and pull back and forth between my thumbnails, and I do page plotting before I get to my scripts.
Okay.
If you're familiar with that at all, it's kind of
Kind of.
like
I mean, how would you do it? Because it could be different from how other creators might understand it too.
yeah. So the way that I learned, there's another guy on YouTube, and I apologize. I can't recall his name right now, but the way that he described it, or his process, I that it worked literally for me, and I was like, cool. I'm going to use this from now on. He creates a chart in Windows Doc. I go use Google Docs instead,
Same.
but it's literally just like a big overview of like page 1 through 24 or however many pages you're planning in your issue. You mark whether or not that page is odd or even, like, am I turning the page?
Mm.
Right.
Okay.
Which is
Yeah.
a great thing to note in case you want to do big reveals or a change of
Hmm.
scene, what have you. And then on the third column, you have an area where you can literally write maybe a sentence or two. This is what happens on the page.
Oh, wow.
So from a distance, it gives you kind of that 50-yard view of like, okay, here's what happens in this issue. Does the pacing feel right? Am I
Mm.
spending too many pages in this area? Does this part of the story need more space to breathe? Do I need to add pages? Um, so I will use my plot or plotting graph
Hmm.
at the same time that I'm using my thumbnails. And as I'm jumping around with my thumbnails and like trying to figure out the layouts, trying to figure out like get a feel for like, does this page, does the pacing feel good? Am I tracking the eye through the page in a way that feels comfortable?
Hmm.
Um, if something's not working in the thumbnails, I will go back to the plots and I'll make adjustments here and there, vice
Oh.
versa. So it's yeah, it's definitely a process of like tugging a little here, pulling a little there, um,
I love that
which
viewpoint though. Like
yeah,
that's really cool. I feel I'm totally gonna steal this 100% because
please do, yeah.
yeah, that's such a good resource. Because I mean, a lot of times, especially writers, I have to say, is that when we're writing scripts, we don't always consider the left or right like where it's landing in the book. And so,
Mm,
we'll all of a sudden toss in like a 2-page spread of some sort. And then there's always like, oh, but does this land right? That means we have to start the issue with it like on this side. And there's a lot of things like designer wise towards the end of the book or when the artist has it in their hands that you realize like, oh, we messed up here. But like, doing that work in the beginning and actually like knowing where your script is going and broken down for,
mhm,
that's so brilliant. Typically, like I know a lot of people, myself included, I just do kind of a paragraph and I'm just like, all right, this is what the issue is about. And I'm just
mhm.
going to pull from this paragraph. But like straight up just detailing it piece by piece is such a clearer way, but like separately on that graph. I really, really adore that. That's a cool little template. I'm definitely trying to pick up on now.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we're, especially in indie comics, like what I love is and correct me if I'm wrong, this is my understanding of it, is like there's really no one standardized way of going about something. It's
Right.
always about like what works best for however you whatever speaks to you and works best for you to get the
Yeah.
product done.
I mean, kind of like
Um,
your lettering, like you're figuring out the best way. Like you have the idea, you know what it is, you've executed it, but now you're just trying to find shortcuts and like going to other creators and learning how they do things kind of can teach you one or two tricks about like one quick click that you didn't know about or a tool that you didn't know about in Illustrator that could totally
yeah,
transform what you're doing overall. And then sometimes with like tools like that, it's just the most ridiculous button that you're like, I never thought to click that one thing and it actually did everything I've been dreaming of this whole time
yeah.
manually.
Yeah, I can tell you I being a more of a like drawing artist and less of a graphic designer, my introduction to like the Adobe suite was Photoshop, and for the
Mhm,
longest time I avoided Illustrator. My partner um, is the one who really like taught me how to use Illustrator. He's the reason I like he's the reason why Illustrator and I are friends now. But definitely through the process of lettering and layout and like setting up my pages in Illustrator and having to look up like, okay, if I want to warp the lettering in a certain way that doesn't
mhm,
take away my ability to make it editable, right? So I
mhm.
can still keep typing whatever I want, but now it's warped. I looked that up on YouTube. And I'm like, okay, how do I do this? Now I've learned something new in Illustrator. I'm like, now we're even better friends.
Yes. Yeah, and I mean, that's part of the thing about being a creator and indie creator, I mean, especially because there's so many things out there to make comics and there's so many tools you need to know and kind of get down and everything just feels like one of those coloring boxes where you have like 200 colors and you're like, where do I even start with like choosing 5 to start working with? Like every program feels like that. So going and
Hmm.
putting in the work and the research to like, all right, I've got to dig through the best 5 videos that shows me the shortcut and see which one like works best for me. And I mean,
Hmm.
it's so time consuming, but it's part of the craft. It's kind of weird. Like the research phase of learning how to teach yourself everything, such a deep part of the craft, especially for lettering and the coloring that you do too, which is really exquisite.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I mean, how much like especially with your I guess look thinking about your artwork and knowing that you're doing stuff with like animation and toys, it kind of makes sense now. Whenever I see or hear creators that go with that, like it has so much life to it and it has like movement to it, not just like action that feels standstill and going panel to panel, but you could feel like a certain fluidity with your art and even with your characters, even yourself like portrait that you have as your character like along everything else, like you feel like the animation from it. Do you think that's like really what carried you through to your comics to make them feel so vibrant?
Um, I like to think so. I've definitely heard people comment a lot on that aspect of my work, which I do appreciate. I'm glad that there is that quality um, that adds so much life and fluidity. I I can definitely like I'll be honest. I'll admit like even going through school through like grade school, I've always had an interest in animation. And then I did get to dabble in it a little bit in my career, even though it's
Mhm.
not my focus. Um, but I think I like it more as far as like the animation aspect and like approaching things in way.
Mhm.
I like it more when it is on my terms versus like if I were to pursue a career in animation. I don't really think that's necessarily for me.
Mhm.
Um, so I really enjoy like getting to dabble in like storytelling that's like animation esque
Mhm.
um, on my own projects.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's kind of just pulling your favorite parts of something and utilizing those
Hmm.
aspects of it, you know, instead of being, because once you devote yourself to something or a certain craft, you're kind of like continuously exploring it and continuously pushing your levels within it. And I feel like that's what you're doing with comics, but you like pulling from these other, aspects to see like how it elevates your current art. And I feel like that totally comes together too, because it looks like you do that with a lot of things. Like I know you have a Mexican heritage, and that's cool. I love hearing that too, because I'm from El Paso, Texas. So I'm half Mexican, and I just like love finding other like creators like that too. And how did you feel like to bleed that in? Like what about like your heritage like inspired you so much to like actually pull into your art and through your stories?
Oh man. Um, Careful, you might open a Pandora's box there.
I'd love to, please. Yeah.
I mean, Husk is really born from my own personal journey with that part of my identity. Um, my my relationship with my Mexican heritage and background is very complicated. Unfortunately, like my parents tried very hard to raise me away as far away from my culture as possible.
Mm.
And as fate would have it, I moved in with my abuelos when I was a teenager. So I
Nice.
was like, I was so far away from it, and I like never learned the language. And then when I was 12, I was like suddenly like plunged into all of this culture
Oh,
and all
rad.
this history. Um, but it was enough time prior to that that I still always felt a little bit like I didn't quite belong,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And so, you know, navigating into adulthood, I always felt a little bit unsure of myself. I would get boxed into various boxes. You know, I would
Hmm.
get picked out by, you know, the oldest whitest boomers. Like
Yeah.
I'd be asked like that most annoying question was like, "What are you?" And I'm like, "Eh."
It makes blend.
um,
Yeah.
and I just wouldn't know how to how to call them out on that shit. Number one.
Yeah.
And two, I didn't know how to stand my ground. I was just like, I don't know. I'm just whatever people want me to be.
Hmm.
Um, so, you know, in 2019, it was actually around Dia de los Muertos, I decided, you know what? I'm going to put in some work. I'm going to find my center, find my authenticity, and try to rekindle that relationship with my roots, reconnect with that on my own terms. Husk comes from the research I was doing and my own like personal attempts to reconnect. And as I was doing my research and I was like learning more about not just Mexican culture in the modern day, but also where it comes from.
Hmm.
Um, you know, both from the colonizer side and then also like the indigenous side. I was really connecting with the Mexica beliefs around death and its role in the cyclical nature of life, death, nature of all things, um, and how it's this very neutral part of our existence, right?
Hmm.
And that it's not considered quite in the same way that Western culture sees it. It's not this
Yeah.
taboo. It's not an end all be all. It's a transition. It's a transmutation.
Hmm.
Um, that clicked with me. That like instantly connected. Um, and I wanted to write a story that pulled a lot from my own experience, from what I was going through, um, and at the same time be this, testament to like the love I really do have for that heritage, for who I am, um, that for so long had felt stifled.
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah,
So
definitely.
that's really what I pour into my comic.
That's so cool. And I love what you said about that too, because death is something that, like, especially in Western culture, American culture, just seems like the scariest, most daunting, like
Hmm.
horrific. Like it's something that you're kind of off put by in a big
Mhm.
sense, but there's so many cultures that accept it like wholeheartedly with love and caring, and it kind of takes you somewhere else. And I think that's a big thing to kind of like introduce and show people, is that it does hurt, it is a painful thing, and knowing all of that, but like there's a beautiful way to look at it as well. And I think that's something that people need to understand a whole lot more, and sending that message. I always say on the show, like, whenever we talk about storytelling in general, but storytelling is survival information. And when you're giving someone something to believe in, and a different perspective to look at something that they're scared of, and you're helping them get through that, that's survival information. That's what you're doing with your stories. So like helping people and guiding them in that different mindset, it's such a beautiful thing to do and take on. And especially because it sounds like you're reconnecting with a deeper part of yourself as well. And I mean, there's so much of part of your life that kind of connects within your comics, from your heritage, from even your punk aesthetic. I even noticed seeing you in person that I like adore so much. I mean, we're all about like punk anthologies and everything, and so we've always really connected with that too. But also like you're a queer comic creator, and I think that's
Mhm.
so like beautiful. And you also introduce some of that into your comics and your work. And
Yes.
we have creators like Max Flowers that co-host everything with us, so we're always trying to highlight some of our better, like, amazing creators like that. And it's so cool hearing that you actually tie in not only that, but with your Mexican heritage, and it's all part of you, and that you're really kind of revealing to the world through your art. Can you speak more about that? Like, how was that difficult for you to even approach with your art? Because even with Mexican heritages and backgrounds, like, I'm growing up with my friends and family, like there's always different, outlooks and approaches. And I had a lot of friends that were just like scared to like come out and like, talk to their families or even approach them, because of how a lot of like Mexican households can be about some topics like that. So was that
Yes.
difficult for you to like navigate through and express through your art?
Um, I would say yes and no. In my current situation, unfortunately, I don't have communication with um, like my dad's side of the family.
Mhm.
That's a long story. We won't get into that.
Yeah.
But I can look back and I can see aspects of like who I was even back then, where I'm like, oh, it's always been there, but I just wasn't in the environment that would allow myself to really get to know that part of me.
Mhm.
um so as an adult, kind of being having the space, having safer spaces,
Mhm.
um to really figure out who I am, and to step into that without judgment, without the fear of like um being ostracized, because that's already happened.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, cool. But I think what really helped too is like having friends who are also Latino themselves, who are also queer, and
Mhm.
getting to see and experience through people that I know, through my friend groups, through chosen family, that we do exist, and it's totally fine, and like these two things can coexist. Um, what I will say, like, the part where it does become difficult is when I do focus on, like, okay, now I'm going to present myself as
Mhm.
these two things that exist together, and how will I be received? That's where it gets more difficult. So, like, internally, I've been able to work that out, but
Mhm.
putting it out there for everyone else to receive and to either fully accept or to question or to reject, that's when it gets a lot more challenging. Um, because there is a part of me that desperately wants to be like unquestionably accepted by the community I come from.
Yeah.
um, and I know that that's definitely a hitch for some people, and you know um, I have to continually remind myself that like the people who are going to gatekeep, the people who are like, well, you're you don't check all of the boxes, or you're too X, Y, or Z.
Mhm.
Therefore, I'm not going to claim you or whatever. I have to remind myself, it's like that's not the people that I want to surround myself with anyway,
Exactly.
you know?
Yeah.
And it also brings comfort again as I was doing as just doing more research and like learning more about myself and about like Mexican history, and just queer history in general, knowing that really the modern world we live in, especially when it comes to queerness in community, um, the fact that like the whole gender binary, especially, and just the erasure of queer identity, it really does come from uh, like the colonizers' influence, and
Hmm.
that queer identities have historically long been a huge and important part of indigenous communities, um, since time immemorial. It brings me a lot of reassurance that um, that I know who I am, and that um, yeah,
No, yeah,
as
that's
a
so much. Because I mean, it's one of those things too. It's like you kind of get, one side of your community, essentially your family, people that
Mhm,
kind of push you away, and it sounds like you've lost track of like some of them. And that I've heard that story so much from other
mhm,
friends and everything, and it's heartbreaking. But at the same time, you've also cultivated and opened up an entire open and loving community on the other end of that spectrum by being who you are and being a creator and an artist who's expressing themselves and having even a different niche, which is like being part of the Latin community as well. And
mhm,
bringing all that together and fusing into one makes it like one of the coolest, most exciting things. And just like along with your aesthetic and along with you doing everything independently, like it's remarkable and it's a lot to overcome because creating something in general is hard to overcome. Putting yourself
mhm,
out there in your artwork, putting your artwork in front of people, putting your idea or something that you did completely on your own, that's difficult because that's a lot of feedback. That's a lot of like, you just get so many, inner, dialogue of like fear
mhm.
and everything. I feel like every creator goes through that, but you also have battled through so much more. So it feels like that creator fear is like, even, minuscule compared to what you've gone through in your life. But you just seem so resilient in every single way of what you're overcoming, but also like building such a cool community, like even though like
Aw.
that one part is cut out, like there's like an entire, if we ever hung out at a con or saw people at a con, it's like, it'd be so exciting to see you in person and like be part of that. Because like you said, like trying to find it online is sometimes difficult. And until you find those like other communities where you could really fit in and like open up and be yourself, it kind of feels weird. It's a little difficult. But once you do, it's like beautiful and it's exciting and you have so much encouragement behind you too. And I think that's why when I came across your profile and saw your art, that's what I was immediately first attracted to. And then just like learning more about you, and I was like, oh, it's a Latin creator. Like I'm always trying to bring out more Latin creators just because I feel like I don't know. We've had like William Keops Ibanez on with us, and like we need more Latin creators and like Christian Herrera and everything. But I love highlighting them just because that's from my region, that's where I'm from, and everything too. So it's cool. I just
Yeah.
love hearing your whole background because there's so much to like love and adore, and it's like I think there's so much more potential to be opened up behind you as you're working through your projects. And I mean, speaking of like community, and because of all that, like since you've put out Husk and since you've put out these books, do you feel like your comic book community has grown a little bit more? Do you feel like you have like resources when you're tabling or like more support at this point too?
I can definitely, yeah. I mean, as far as the convention scene, I've I'm not like full steam ahead just yet.
Mhm.
I've been to I think two conventions last year, and prior to that, I was erring on the side of caution. I was very much like I'm going to hold off. So 2022, I didn't come back to conventions at all. Um, but 2023, I was kind of like getting my feet wet again. So and those conventions were fairly short. I was at like a 1 day convention um, last year in
Cool.
June, and it was like a Pride convention.
Oh, rad.
And then I was also at LA Comic Con in
Oh,
December.
rad. Cool.
Yeah, and so like even though it's only been two conventions, and that's not a lot of time to really like build in-person community here and there, the connections that I have made, the people that I have met,
Hmm.
have been like they make the whole weekend worth it. They
Yeah.
make all of the effort so worth it. And that's what I find really special. That online, it's also like I don't want to like compare like in person versus online, because
Mm.
I've met some really amazing people online as well, but there really is that like indescribable, just spark in with in person,
Oh yeah.
community where you're connecting with somebody, and they're right there in front of you, and it's just very special, very amazing.
Yeah, like we were kind of talking right before the show. Like I was stuck at at a long convention all weekend, and it's one of those things where it's like the hours are crazy, but it all kind of makes it worth it because the people that you're with. You're all kind of
Yes.
battling through it together. You're all kind of comparing notes. Like when it's slow, you're all just like, "Damn, it's slow right now." Like I hope I get like
Hmm.
one more sale in, and it's a constant thing of like uplifting and keeping each other going. And sometimes when you're around the right people and you see them hustling and grinding, it inspires you to hustle and grind a little bit more. And you kind of get
Yeah.
like con tips, or you see how somebody set up their sign and you could be like, oh, I could try that next time. And you kind of get to
Hmm.
compare notes. It's all about growing and it's all about helping each other. And I mean, some people do view it as competition for sure, because it's like they're trying to get every, passerby's buck at a certain point. But a lot of people are just
Hmm.
like, I need to get my stuff out there. And that's what's important.
Yeah.
And, however else we can help balance that out, that's what comes from, that's what's best for everybody. And so,
Hmm.
you're
Hmm.
working through Husk and you're working on thumbnails of issue 3 right now. How are you
Yes.
planning out everything from like a storytelling perspective? Are you thinking of a larger overarching series that you want to do? Is it like are you have like a closing point and you want to move on to a new project? What's like your future outlook on this and your next project possibly?
Yes. So it was originally written as a graphic novel that I just broke into issues
Mm,
as more attainable milestones where I can get pieces of the story out there. So I do
nice.
have a definitive end that this story is moving towards.
Cool.
And because after as I'm working on this story, I do have other stories that have been on the back burner for a while that I
Hmm.
would love to get to. And with those stories, now that I know, like, oh, now that I've built like an indie comic community, it's like I can be better prepared to actually possibly put together a team one day. Um, and and like I'm already talking to a friend right now about one story that if if time on my end allows, I might be able to like start working on it, in the background after issue 4 of Husk is done.
Oh,
But
cool.
I currently, the way that I have everything laid out, Husk will be 12 issues. And then it'll be, um, again, like depending on if the fates smile upon me or not, um, I would love to be able to at least compile 4 issues at a time into different volumes, into
Ooh.
trade paperbacks. And then at the end of it, fingers crossed, maybe a full compilation of the entire graphic novel.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I love that like breakaway pro aspect too. I was just talking about it with some creators recently. Is that like especially with indie books, it's you have a lot of us have like long-term projects. Like I have,
Mhm.
two like 6-issue series in mind. I have friends who have like a 7-issue series that they're working towards, and they're already on Starside actually comics. We just interviewed them. They're entering their 7th issue of their series. My friend Doug from Cross Eye Comics this weekend has a book. It's only about 2 or 3 issues, but he already put it into a trade. And then I'm
Mm.
seeing other people do like, their first 3 issues they might put into a trade. And I think that's really smart as an indie creator because, like, when you're tabling and it takes a while to table and people
Mhm.
start buying your work over time, to me, it seems kind of smart to be like, okay, I'm going to put out issue 1, 2, and 3. That's essentially an arc. But once you start going past those further issues, I feel like it's almost harder to sell everything because then you're trying to sell everyone on issues 1 through 5. And then maybe 6 is going to be the trade. And so you're having to catch them
Mhm.
up, but catching
Mhm.
them up in a batch with like the time frames we work with, because it might take, I mean, you're on issue 3 right now that you're
Mhm.
wrapping up and or just starting actually. And I mean, you've been at this for what, 3 or 4 years now, I would say, like working on your book.
Yeah. It's been off and on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in total, like I started in 2021, but there was a long hiatus I had to take.
Yeah.
The majority of 2022, um, for health reasons.
Oh yeah. See,
So there
so
was
much can
like a
pop
hiccup
up in
there.
that time.
Yeah.
So I mean, like putting it together on the fourth volume, on fourth issue, I feel like that really does catch up all your new fans instead of having to
Hmm.
like go, oh, I'm missing issue 3 and 4 is already out, or whatever hiccup may happen. You know what I mean? Whenever they see you at tabling or online, like I think compiling your stuff in those chunks makes it a little bit better for like your audience to like digest your work a little bit. So I love how you're already kind of pre-planning on your model of, kind of think of an audience standpoint as well. And just for you, I mean, at least if you did 4 issues, you could pause for a little bit, work on a second project, and then feel comfortable diving back into it as a new arc
Hmm.
kind of begins too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have had people come up to like my table at LA Comic Con who are asking for the trades. Like they would see the artwork on the front cover of issue one, and they'd ask like, "Oh, do you have a trade available?" And I'm like, sorry, just the one issue for now." And I totally respect that because even as a consumer myself, as a reader myself, like I love trades. I love
Yeah.
um, the not simplification, but I like having just the one book to keep track of.
Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, yeah.
Because I, and I'm sure a lot of comic enthusiasts might judge me for this, but I do have single issues here and there. But I I would really like I get filled with so much anxiety when I see like, oh, there's a new storyline, but I've missed the first 4 or 5 issues. Do I spend the time to go get back issues, or do I just buy the trade that's right here and I can catch up
Right.
right then and there? Um, and also from a printing standpoint, logistically, it saves me more. It saves me from like the headaches of like keeping track how much of issues 2 through 5 or 6 do I
Hmm.
have on hand. Do I need to print more? um, all of this that I'm doing, I print out of pocket, or print I pay for my prints out of pocket.
Hmm.
um, so being able to like one day, if I do a trade, I'd like to be able to get it done through a Kickstarter so I can have, at least 200-300
Yeah.
copies on hand and be set, for a couple of years. Um, you know, but yeah, that would be better than trying to keep track of like 4 separate issues and how much do I have of each, and am I going to run out at any particular
Hmm.
convention? Is someone going to come up who's a new reader and I just sold out of like issue 2 but I have 1, 3 and 4?
Yeah.
I wouldn't blame them if they're like, actually, I'm going to move on. Like,
Yeah.
I wouldn't
Yeah.
blame them.
Exactly. I met a creator this weekend that was just like, what, on Saturday, they're like, I'm not even gonna pop back in tomorrow. I have one more copy of issue one, and it just doesn't make sense for me to like come back without an issue one, but I have 2 and 3 with me. So he felt like he was already excluding his audience from the start and like putting a pause on things. And I
Hmm.
was like, that makes sense. Like
Hmm.
if that's how your things are formatted, you are kind of losing out. It's good that he did sell, that last copy of issue one. I was so hyped to hear that, and he felt comfortable dipping out, but it's one of those issues like pertaining to like your inventory, because you have to hook a person so quickly at a table, or a
Hmm.
comic book shop that you're kind of passing by, and having just something quick and easy and accessible just is so much better for people. And it's probably easier just to make that sale when you are tabling at that point too, just being like, it's everything's collected right here, and if
Hmm.
you're a big fan, by all means get the single issues, that's great. But just getting them all in one spot, I feel like that's pristine and a lot better. And it gives you more variety too, Plus, if you're
Hmm.
packing up for a con and traveling, maybe instead of taking all the
So
single
much easier.
issues, yeah,
Yeah.
just take like the trades and some extra stuff and just hustle that. Because I mean, the life of, just selling the single number one issue. So you kind
Hmm.
of know, like, okay, I just got to push the trade. It's everything together. It seems smarter, and
Hmm.
maybe a handful of copies of each other one, and not really
Hmm.
having to deal with that. That's so cool. And I mean, it sounds like, you wanting to collaborate with others is like you also being open as an artist. Where did the whole art thing start from? The art, like just love of art and like wanting to dive into it so deeply. Where did that start from? Because like what you're doing and so independently like has to have some deeper roots for the type of work you're putting out and the amount of work you're putting out.
I don't know if this is a satisfying enough answer. I started drawing when I was like 3, and I just never stopped.
No, yeah, that's I mean, you just knew it how to. Yeah.
I just knew it. It definitely worried my parents as I was getting up into high school, and they were like, "So, what do you want to do? What career do you want to pursue?" And I'm like, "I just like drawing. I don't know." And at the time, in the I mean, I graduated high school in 2009. That gives you a hint as to how old I am. Um, at the time, at least to what I was exposed, there really wasn't a lot of like knowledge as far as creative endeavors, creative
Mhm.
careers, what the
Yeah.
options were out there. So I had no idea what I wanted to do. I just knew that I wanted to do something creative. And I actually ended up getting my first big break in the toy industry,
Oh,
which
wow.
was like just a big stroke of luck, as far as like not previously knowing that it
Mhm.
existed.
Yeah.
Which is now, 10 years in, I look back and I'm like, okay, it makes sense why I wouldn't know that there were actual people designing what goes up on shelves.
That's true. Yeah,
Um,
honestly. It's never
but
presented as, like, a career option even when you're, like,
no,
studying the arts in high school or college sometimes even. Like,
yeah.
the toy industry, once as a collector before I really got into, like, making my stuff, I was like, "Oh, wait, maybe that might be an avenue," but it felt so, like, niche and, like, impossible to get into. Like, how did you find your way into that?
So it's kind of funny. I actually went to school originally for video game design, thinking like
Oh, cool.
that would be my way in, because
Mhm.
I liked video games. I was like, yeah, that's cool. Kind of want to give that a spin. And I was still pretty active on DeviantArt, and
Oh,
I had
okay,
like a
yeah.
circle of friends from DeviantArt. Well, someone I knew who had gone to like a school that had like a toy design program. She was doing an internship at the I think it was maybe in the company that I was at, or maybe in like a company right prior to it. But her boss was like, "Hey, really love your drawing skill. Do you? But we're looking for a second hand. Um, do you know anybody?" And she had sent me a message. She's like, um, you know, would this be interesting to you? Do you want to at least put in your portfolio and see if you get an interview? And so, I mean, I didn't know anything about the toy industry. I was like, oh, okay, this sounds cool. Yeah. And when I did show up with my portfolio, the only thing I was missing was like turns,
Oh, cool.
orthographic turns.
Mhm.
I had a lot of like illustration and like concept stuff, but I really didn't know what to bring for toy design. And luckily, I had my sketchbook with me, and I was working on another story that may eventually see the light of day as a comic. But I was working on like illustrations and whatnot, and I had um, characters and props turned in that sketchbook. And it was very lucky that I had that sketchbook with me because to this day, I swear, I'm pretty sure that's what was the deciding factor. I was like, okay, you can think in 3D. Um, and that's that's really how I kind of got my big break into the toy industry. Um, but yeah.
Does that like, also, I mean, I'm thinking about, I mean, you work with toys, you had like dabbles in animations. I'm thinking about that, like the actual like drawings you do for your comic too. And they are very, and not like in like an easy sense, but they are very simplified. Like you are very
Mhm.
precise on like what's presented and like the line. And like, I know animation, you have to make it simple so that it's very consistent and almost anyone could pick up that simplicity and, be consistent with it.
Yeah.
And even with toys, you have to have like the very strong basic frame and then building upon it. Like, how
Mhm.
does that even enhance your character design with comics too? Knowing how to like design a figure and a toy, and do you think that would actually benefit creators by like looking into some of those aspects of toy creation?
It's actually kind of um I'll kind of how do I go about answering that? Um With the comic, I definitely lean more like simpler character designs because I know that like I'm going to be drawing these characters
Sure.
over and over
Yeah.
and over and over again. Very much like an animation.
Yeah.
You're going to be drawing 24 frames per second of the same character, and you want to be sane at the end of it.
Yeah, true. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um, so that's why when I did do the designs for Husk, I leaned more towards like they need to be very simple. They need to be like easy to draw. Um, with toy, sometimes designs can be very simplistic,
Mhm.
and that like not that they're lower quality or anything. Like when you have a really good strong design and it's also simple, like it's graphically sound. It's very
Mhm.
good. Um, Depending on the brand that you're working on, sometimes it can demand more attention to detail.
Mhm.
I mean, for example, like if you're comparing, like I work in mass market.
Mhm.
So a lot of the products that I'm working on are going to be aimed more towards like a younger consumer. So kids ages like 8 to 14. Um, and of course, in preschool, it's going to be the designs are going to be even simpler.
Mhm.
But then you look at collector level products such as like hot toys, like
Yeah.
the attention to detail and just everything that goes into those figures. It's you still want like a very strong structure underneath, a strong idea of like if you're doing a maquette, make sure that gesture line looks good at any angle.
Mhm.
But then you can go in and you can add all the detail you want because it's a collector's edition, and so you have a higher
Mm.
price point. Um, and you can afford like I don't know how much you know about product design, but it's like every hit of color on a product usually is it's considered a paint op, a paint
Oh, wow.
operation. So the more you have of those, the more expensive the product is.
Oh, interesting. No, I didn't
Yeah.
know that. That explains a lot too. I'm thinking
Hmm.
about a lot of my figures and everything. That totally makes sense. Oh,
Hmm.
wow. What else, like, varies on that spectrum too? I mean, you're talking about detail, you're talking about color, like as accessories, I'm assuming another aspect of that too, that like the more they have, like, or even the tinier, like maybe it's more production design and like that's what boosts like the price on all that type of stuff too.
It can depend on what accessories you mean. So if you mean like something that's like attached sculpturally
Hmm.
to a figure, then that's the cost of that is going to come into how you design the tool. Like I know this has nothing to do with comics,
No, yeah, I'm still
but
interested. Yeah, no, it's super
but
cool though.
yeah, how the actual tool is built and like how many pieces you'll need to actually pull the tool apart,
Mm.
that can drive cost, but also piece count. So if you're talking accessories in regards to like how many extra things do they come with,
Hmm.
um, can also potentially, depending on how you go about it, it can affect cost.
Okay, cool. I mean, and as like a comic creator that dabbles with all this, like, would you love to see Husk like figures and stuff like that as well? Is that like a possibility on your horizon?
One day. Oh, actually, I was not prepared to bring this out, but I can go grab. I had commissioned an art doll creator to make an art doll of Charlotte.
Oh, that'd be
If you
super cool
don't
to see.
mind
Yeah.
me stepping away from the desk for a second,
Yeah. Totally.
is
Yeah.
there a way to like? I don't know if I can pause the video
Oh no,
here.
you're fine. Yeah, Alex will edit it out. You're totally good. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I will be right back then. So this is the art doll of Charlotte. Oops, his
Oh
ears are a little bit.
wow.
Let me see if I can get my light, get a little bit better there.
I mean, how
Um,
rewarding is that for you too to have like a figure of something you've created?
It's it's amazing.
I can imagine. Yes.
I so because he is handmade, I have to pick and choose like which conventions
Hmm.
I take him with me. But one of the first conventions I had gone to, he was basically my little table buddy, and
So
so he'd
cool.
hang out next to the comics, and um, you know, I it's it's very rewarding just to have something sculptural
Hmm.
that represents like here's a character in the story um, that you're gonna meet, and he's gonna be a significant character. And I feel like even if it's like acrylic standees, just something visual where people can see the characters outside of the books and like experience like, okay, um, this is what I can expect. I think helps. It can help people kind of get hooked onto the characters. Like, who is this? What is
Yeah.
their personality like?
It can
So
resonate with them,
yeah,
like, more immediately, just kinda, like, just seeing them like, outside of that realm in, like, a 3D, like, a perspective. You kinda can connect with
yeah,
it and feel like, "Okay, like, this is something I wanna interact with a little bit more," versus, like, a 2D plane, I guess. I guess that's, like, a big difference between I never really considered that
mhm,
too, is that how attractive that seems, like, to have it, in person in front of you, and then you get to dive into the world it's from. That's kind of a great
yeah,
marketing scheme on your part too. I mean, that's brilliant. That's like super awesome on every level. I feel like that benefits you. Just having even one with
yeah.
you, super great.
One other thing I almost forgot to mention is I actually commissioned a friend of mine. He goes by Enky Skulls, ENKY Skulls, um, on Instagram. Him and his, I believe they're married. They're him and his wife. They do plushies,
Oh
and I
wow.
did commission them to do a couple of plushies. Like I don't sell these yet.
Mhm.
I just wanted to see how they would turn out, and I absolutely adore them. These are the ashalots that assist him with guiding the dead in the comic.
Oh cool.
Um, I actually have the comic. I can show you like which panels they show up in, but they're little beanie babies,
That's so
right? And
sick.
they're just
Yeah.
little like Mictlan ashalots, and they are
Do you think that helps like attract like a different
these
levels of
guys.
people too? That's so cool. It's
Yeah.
cool seeing that like just mimicked into life. Like I feel like does that attract different, age ranges towards your booth as well to like kind of bring them towards you?
Hopefully not, because it is
Oh,
a
it's true
mature
because
comic.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, actually, yeah, it's one of those things. I know we have a couple of things that we're just like, you know what, this looks awesome, but we got to stir you away. Like, yeah, no,
Yeah,
yeah, it's good to
yeah,
have that warning against some stuff. I just realized that too, thinking about it. But I mean, still,
yeah,
like, even for adults, like we see stuff like that, we're immediately attracted to it. But it's fun having that like that spectrum between everything as well. How cool!
yeah. This for sure is like because I love Beanie Babies, and I just wanted one of my little axolots to be a Beanie Baby. This
Yeah,
was very much for myself, and if there are, one day as the readership grows, if there is a demand for like we want the axolots, then I'm like, okay, okay, here they are. But at that point, I would have to be very clear about like this is for the adult collectors, the adult readers, because this comic is not for kids.
the plushie could be for the kids, the book could be for the adults, and you
Yeah,
could go that route. Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, that's so great. Well, I mean, gosh, this has been such an interesting hour of just like absorbing what you do, who you are, and like how you produce and how you think about your stories. I mean, there's so much complexities to you that like really make it really exciting. And I really want to have you like on our live drawing show, Spilled Ink, sometime. So you could kind of show
Yeah.
us how you kind of navigate through some of this and we could jam out and just have some fun draw time because like what you bring out as a creator, I think is just so respectful. It's like, everything that makes art amazing. It's about being unique. It's about being yourself. It's about expressing yourself. And like from your aesthetic that to like what you create to who you are as a person is just so fun and it's so flavorful that I think a lot of people just can't handle it. And that's why if anyone has an issue, it's because they're just like they just can't handle stuff like that and they're boring. But like you're an amazing, like and like just astonishing individual. And I love it. I love it
Oh,
so much. And I can't wait to
I
read more
appreciate
Husk.
that.
I can't wait to read more of your comics. I'm so happy that you got to hang out here on the show and we get to like help get you a boost of some sort because more people need to be looking at your comic because you could go
Oh,
online and check it out for like on your website, which is super
yes.
awesome. Yeah.
Yes, you can currently read it on huskcomic.com. And I also am posting pages once every 2 weeks on Webtoons and Global Comics.
Rad. And before we sign off, do you have any other conventions or anything you have planned for the rest of the 2024 you want to talk about or announce?
Yeah, so right now, I mean, I know it's kind of a far way out, but I will be back to LA Comic Con in October. And
Cool.
that's for now, that's the only convention I have lined up. But hopefully by then, I may not have issue 3 done just yet, but I will definitely have issue 1 and 2.
Sick. Awesome. Well, we'll definitely keep us on any tags whenever you do that as well. And remember to tag us on all your posts. Like if you're sharing your artwork or stories or announcements, I'd love to share it on the CWS social media and other avenues that we'll be announcing. It's super exciting to hear what you're up to. But thank you so much. This has been such a fun hour. And everyone else, all of our watchers and listeners, thank you for joining us for another Creator Talk. Don't forget to like, subscribe, check out their info below, and just check out their artwork. It's really great to support all the creators we have on the show, because it's going to leak into other things that we're doing behind the scenes with the new announcements coming out the way as well. So keep an eye out for all that. Don't forget to subscribe to the CWS newsletter if you haven't, for lots of new information that I'm posting on there as well. And as always, thanks for hanging, stay creative, and stay inspired. Looking for high quality printing, fast turnaround, and the industry's best customer service? Look no further than Comics Wellspring. Trusted by thousands of indie comic creators, Comics Wellspring is proven to be the go to comic book printer. So when you're ready to bring your comic books to life, go to comicswellspring.com and be sure to check out one of the best platforms to sell your physical and digital comics online, the CWS Bookstore. Remember to subscribe, hit that notification bell to see our lives come out twice every single week on YouTube and podcast platforms. And also tag us when you share your favorite episodes and moments from the show. And remember, creators, thanks for hanging, keep creating, and stay inspired.